Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this panel on consciousness in support of Amudim. We are really lucky tonight to have Rav Pinson. I've known Rav Pinson for several years now. I would say he may be the most knowledgeable person on Jewish mysticism, at least people that speak English. And we have Mark Gober, a consciousness author and podcast host. And we're really lucky to have them both together. This should be interesting. I would like to start by asking Mark, since I don't know you so well, where do you get your knowledge from?
Well, my background is in business. I worked in investment banking in New York during the financial crisis, spent 10 years at a Silicon Valley strategy firm, worked my way up to partner there. But 4 years ago, I was listening to podcasts and learned about some phenomena that I was not familiar with previously, which some would call paranormal. And that led me to start to research science around the nature of consciousness and whether consciousness is in our brain or beyond the brain or the fundamental basis of all reality and things of that nature. So my information, at least initially, has come from looking at science and interviewing many scientists and practitioners, but I'd say more recently, as this 4-year period has evolved, through meditation and through my own personal development, I've had personal experiences too.
So as an analyst, you'd call that a bottom-up approach?
Sounds right to me.
Okay. Rabbi Pinson, can you describe what you do a little bit and where you're getting your knowledge from?
What I do is, that's a very big question, Levi. First of all, I try to live. I think that's the first,
right.
That's a big thing, to live fully and to live deeply and to live with a deep level of consciousness. There's two sources, two streams of wisdom or streams of information. One is the text. So basically, we have a living embodiment of spiritual teachers and masters throughout the years, great Kabbalists, great rabbis, that spoke about their own personal experiences, which means that we believe that when it says about Mount Sinai, about Mount Torah, that Kol Gadol Lo Yosef, that was a great echo that did not end, is that the sounds of Sinai, the reverberations of Sinai, of the revelation, is continuous. And when a person evolves their consciousness into a higher level, they can actually tap into that sound of revelation. So it's not just information that's written on a book that's given over because one person figured this out intellectually, but it's actually experiential, that these are experiences that these great mystics and Kabbalists and rabbis throughout the ages have experienced in their own life and then written them down. And that's one source of information. I think the second source of information, which is important for every person, is that a person has to really evolve themselves in order to get this type of information, that it's not just reading it from the text, but it actually becomes a living tradition, that we have a real relationship with, we call, in Hebrew, we call Elokim Chaim, a living God. That our relationship with Hashem is not a relationship with an idea, not a relationship with a stale idea, certainly, but a relationship with a God that's a living God, that our presence of living with the Noichas B'nai Hashem, living with the presence of God, is something that should be a vibrant, experiential, and intimate experience that we experience moment to moment.
So if I may interject, I would say the basis of your knowledge is from the text, and then you've experienced things from there, because we've gone to some of the same schools. You're obviously a lot more learned and knowledgeable than me, but you're taking a top-down approach, and it's actually very interesting. And let's see if the both of you come to the same conclusion. By the way, I'm Levi Nagel, and I'm dialing in from Los Angeles. I'd like to jump right into a subject that may be hard for some people that have suffered traumatic experiences, or and so much so that they're in a state where they're trying to shut things down and maybe even taking substances to shut out things in life. This concept of whatever's happening to you is not actually happening to you, but it's happening for you. And we have sources for this in the Mishnah. I guess it says we should say that Bishvili Nivra Olam, the world was created for me. Everything that's actually happening is happening for your benefit. Rabbi Pinson, would you like to elaborate on that and how that really works?
The idea of that everything is happening
For you.
for you.
Versus you.
Right. So there's a way to come to life. Let's just say it like this. There's a way to come to life, which is that we say that mikra likra, this is like in Hebrew means that this is a happenstance. Something just happens. So when the Rambam, which is a classic writer in Jewish law, speaks about this in the laws of kindness, he says that if someone says that things are just a mikra likra, things are just happenstance, this person is called an achzari. This person is called in Hebrew literally translates as a cruel person. But the root of the word achzari actually comes from the word achzar, which means that you're becoming a foreigner or you're becoming alienated from life. That the real way to live and to live deeply is to understand that there's really only one. Now, what does it mean that there's really one? We say that Hashem is echad, that Hashem is one. It's not only that there is only one God, but actually the truest definition is Hashem echad means that there's absolute monotheism, which means that there is only one, and this one is reflected into many, and it's reflected into the duality and the multiplicity of creation. But it's a one in its essence, on the level, the deepest level of soul. It's actually connected to one. So in the place of that oneness, in the place of Yechidah, there's a total interdependency or interconnectivity between everything that's going on in creation. So on one level, we'll say like this, that on one level, and I think you can experience this, so you'll understand what I'm trying to say, is on one level, we're all interconnected on a finite space level, time, space, consciousness level, where we're all in the effect of something. So that's like the world we'll call the world of nature. So in the world of nature, we're all interconnected, and we know this, that the entire ecosystem is one system. It's one dimension, and there's multiple aspects of this dimension, but every part of creation is interconnected, and you do one thing, it affects the entire cosmos. But then there's another thing, which is where you actually become not just in the effect of life, you actually also become the cause of life. So I'll give you another analogy of this. So there's the creator, which is the koyach, let's call it the shefa, the source, and then which is the mashpia, the giver, and then there's the makabel, which is the receiver, which is the effect. So when you live in a place of the effect of life, and living in the effect of life means you're just reacting to life. Something happens to you, someone insults you, you get angry, someone says something nice to you, you feel good about yourself. You're basically, the weather is nice, you feel good. Whenever you're reacting to life, you're actually in the effect of life. So then you subscribe to the world of nature. You're also interdependent, and your reaction will have an effect, but you're not causing anything. You're not actually creating anything new. The moment you choose to recognize what we'll call the Tselem Elokim, or the Neshama, the spark of soul, or your higher dimension aspect of the creator aspect within you, the possibility to become a mashpia, to become a giver, you actually become the vessel, the conduit through which the divine life force, the koyach hashefa that comes into this world, is the cause of the effect. So not only are you in the effect of creation, but now you're also in the aspect of creation. You're actually affecting creation. So that's how I would say that's like the two levels of the interdependency of life. So the first recognition is that we're not a zar to life, we're not a foreigner to life. And because that's cruel, we're actually, everything is part of us, and everything's part of the achdus. Now in that itself, I would say that there's these two levels, where one is where you're just in the effect of things, and you're in the effect of everyone's bad mood. And a person is in a bad mood, and the person's thoughts affect what's going on in the world, a person's words, and certainly a person's actions. But everything that a person does, a person releases, I don't want to call it energy, but it releases like vibrations for every thought that a person has, for every action a person does, for every word that a person says, and that reverberates through the entire creation. So we have a choice whether we're going to be on the level of effect, which we're just the makabel of life, or just a receiver, or there's a shlas asur, that we become like the creator, so to speak, just like the creator is a teva tov, the nature of good is to give goodness, is to be a mashpia, to give. when we decide to give to life, to further the world, to be better in this world, to make better choices in this world, and create goodness in this world, we're actually becoming part of the Creator's light, the key, and therefore we can further things and not just be in the effect, but also be in the cause.
Mark, let me jump to you. Let's what would you say, even with somebody not making any conscious decisions whatsoever, whatever is going around around them, would you call that happening for their benefit? And happening to them is happening for their benefit and for them? How would you describe it?
Well, my short answer to that, I would say, is generally yes, but I'll take a step back by explaining the worldview that I now have based on the science that I've looked at, which is now turning more into lived experience, but this will be the basis for many of my answers. Basically, the way I look at the nature of reality is, to use an analogy from a philosopher named Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, he says it's like we are whirlpools within an infinite stream, where this infinite stream is the consciousness that is the underlying basis of all reality. So this sense of experiencing that we all have, that's innate in all of us, that's consciousness. And this idea that I'm describing here is that we are all part of a unitary consciousness, but we are individuated whirlpools in a larger stream. So we have this sense of being an individual, even though we're interconnected to the broader stream. And to quote Erwin Schrödinger, the Nobel Prize winning quantum physicist, because a lot of quantum physics gets into these similar ideas too, he said, "In truth, there is only one mind." And so this is in many ways similar to what Rav Pinson was saying, that we're interconnected. It's almost like we are dissociated aspects of this unitary consciousness. And quickly, the way I arrived at this idea is through looking at phenomena where our consciousness seems to exist beyond the body. One in the area of psychic phenomena, and this is drawing on many scientific peer-reviewed papers, research at Princeton University. Actually, the US government ran a psychics program. So tons of evidence in that area, which is sort of like water from one whirlpool entering another whirlpool. So part of one person's consciousness getting into another person's consciousness, or another part of the stream, this non-local consciousness. That's one area of science. The other is survival of bodily death. So things like a near-death experience, or children who have a memory of a life that is not their own. And this is referring to research done at the University of Virginia, where children, over 2,500 of them, describe some life, and the researchers are sometimes able to find evidence that historical records, medical records that align with what the child says. So all of these independent areas of scientific research suggest that consciousness exists beyond the body. So it's sort of like when a whirlpool in a stream stops being a whirlpool, the water flows back into the broader stream. It doesn't leave the stream. So if we accept this one mind view of reality, this one stream of which we're individuated pieces, and if we accept this idea of reincarnation, which I alluded to through the children with past life memories idea, and then also in the near-death experience, for example, if a person has cardiac arrest or some kind of physiological trauma, upon being resuscitated, they sometimes describe this elaborate reality. Sometimes it's multidimensional. They talk about unconditional love. They sometimes meet deceased relatives. Sometimes they see things in the room that are later verified as accurate, meaning
we'll get into those subjects. I want to get into those subjects later. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, really quickly. But there's a life review is something that comes up where people relive their life in a flash, and they see how they interacted towards other people. And the reason I want to point to that is when they come back into their body, they say, wait, what matters in this life is how we interact with people. And sometimes the little things are actually the big things. And life seems to be about testing ourselves in a sense. How can we act in a caring, compassionate way? And life seems to bring people these circumstances so that they can test themselves and see how well they do. And perhaps the reincarnation cycle allows people to learn different lessons through different vessels.
So, okay, so on that note, let's use an extreme example. And let's say there was a child that was abused as a child, did nothing wrong and was abused. Was that for their good? How would you see that?
I think it's a complex question. I do think there is an element of karma to the extent that the human mind can understand it, where something from a past life may be impacting what's happening in this life. And in connection with that, there is a potential learning from something that might seem dark from a limited perspective. If we zoom out and take a helicopter's perspective and look down, we might see there are some broader benefits that we couldn't understand from the smaller view.
Rav Pinson, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very complicated question, and it's a very, so the answer, of course, is yes. Of course, the answer is that there's some learning thing, but the answer is also no, and there's both simultaneously true. And I'll give you a little analogy of a story, which is a story of the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov once, after the Baal Shem Tov passed away, there was a terrible decree. There's something very terrible that was going to happen, and his student, the Maggid of Mezrich, was upset at his teacher that passed away, at his Rebbe, and in his mind he said, you know, when the Rebbe was alive, when the Baal Shem Tov was alive, we'd get together, we'd say, you know, Tehillim, we'd do different rituals, and we were able to mitigate this decree. And now the Baal Shem Tov sort of passed away and doesn't really care anymore. So the Baal Shem Tov appears to him in a dream, and he tells him, I hear that you have issues with what's going on. And he says, yeah, I'm very upset that you see this terrible decree that's about to happen, and you don't really care anymore. You left this world and you don't care. So Baal Shem Tov says, yes, from my worldview, which we call like the helicopter view, but a bigger worldview, when I could see the whole story, I actually see it as a positive thing. So the Maggid said, so what should I do? Should I stop praying? He said, no, you have to continue praying, because from your perspective, it's still negative. So the moment we choose to justify abuse in any shape or form, because we say, oh, it's, you know, it's karma, and the child has to learn something, and the person, that's the moment we allow that to happen in this world. So therefore, we have to fight any type of negativity, certainly that's perpetuated against young people that don't have really choice. We have to fight with all our possibility, with any type of means that we have, to ensure that this never happens to any child in the world. In our understanding, we have to say this is the worst possible thing that should happen, and therefore we have to make sure that never happens. Once it's past tense, which is it did already happen, God forbid, if things happen, then we can talk to the child at some point in this person's life without justifying and saying, what was the light, what was the perspective that you learned from this experience that allowed you to grow to be that person, but never to justify it while it's happening, because then we give credence and we allow evil to survive. And we have to.
There are times, and again, the reasoning behind that we don't necessarily understand in this lifetime, as both of you are saying, but there are times that something terrible happens, and then a person hits rock bottom, and that opens a new door into being able to go to a new dimension, a higher level of consciousness that they weren't seeking before, or they never would have gotten to otherwise. And again, whether it's good or bad, we don't judge for other people. We assume everything is good.
Right, Levi, you can only say that to yourself.
Right.
A person's only allowed to say that to himself. A person can say, I'm hitting rock bottom. What am I learning from the experience? When it's another person, you're never supposed to say that. That's the other person's choice.
Thank you. So, Mark, I want to delve into another subject within consciousness, as different levels of consciousness. I want to hear how you see things. I've had some experiences myself, let's say being hypnotized to be able to see past lives. And the way I understood it was my conscious mind was being shut down, which allowed me to tap into my subconscious, which wasn't limited by time and space. But my understanding is, and again, I don't fully comprehend this, and this is part of why I'm asking, we have different levels of consciousness within us, and I would like to hear, Mark, how you see it. And also even like where they're physically located within the body. So we have the conscious mind, maybe the subconscious mind. We have what we call, and maybe Rabbi Pinson will elaborate on this, we have the spark of God within us. We have a soul, and there's supposedly different aspects. And some are located in the brain, some are located in the heart, some are located in the lifeblood. Mark, do you have anything you can share with us as to any of those, any different levels, and then how to tap into these different levels of consciousness?
Sure. So as I said, I view the body as the vessel, the vehicle for this broader consciousness, and in that capacity, it actually acts as a limiting factor. It's a filter of consciousness rather than the producer of consciousness. So the brain, contrary to a lot of popular scientific thinking, is limiting a much broader reality. So we only see a sliver of it. And so the body and maybe it's not just the brain, maybe it's other aspects of the body that allow us to tap into different parts of the stream, so to speak, these different dimensions of the broader stream of consciousness. And how we can do that, there are kind of a number of areas I've seen scientifically where this occurs. I mentioned a near-death experience. That's an extreme case where the person's brain is completely knocked out, and yet they have a hyper-lucid consciousness. People also talk about psychedelics, in which the brain functioning is actually reduced during the time of the psychedelic trip, but people talk about other dimensions of consciousness. And the area where I've maybe experienced this most to a small degree is in meditation, which is a way of quieting the brain and maybe opening up the filter a little bit. And I've had varying degrees of experiences through that.
Rav Pinson, do you mind elaborating about on the different levels within the body, I guess, today, at least in Jewish texts, and what you actually know in terms of the soul and where that is in terms of the spark of God, or what that's considered? Is that the soul? How would you describe it?
Okay, so first of all, I would just say, to get back a little to what Mark was saying, is that there is a level where the brain is actually a jamming system, where really our consciousness is much larger than the brain. And that's why people that actually do go through near-death experiences, which Levi, you should know because you sponsored this book, this about the near-death experience and the afterlife, which is this idea that when people go through these near-death experiences, as the brain is shutting down, something really phenomenal is happening. You would think that people lose memory, but what actually happens is actually the reverse, is people start gaining new memory that they never knew they knew, because the brain is sort of like the filter that holds onto the ego and says, okay, this is my narrative, this is my story, this is the information that I need to have. That's something that was created most times by youth or sometimes by education, and there's a certain type of story that we assume I'm this person and that person, therefore this is information that I need, and this is subliminally. We don't do this, consciously, that this is information I need, this is information I don't need. The information that I don't need are completely blocked out. And when a person is the brain, it's mostly part, we'll call it like the left part of the brain, the very analytical part of the brain that's trying to make sense out of things and trying to logically define things, what we call the moich bina. When that's slowly quieted down, then higher levels of our consciousness, which is moich chachma, which is the potential of the right part of the brain, which is connected to higher higher parts of the brain, higher parts of consciousness start becoming revealed. So there are different, when we talk about consciousness or soul or the energy, of course there are many different levels, and we have different words for this, like nefesh, ruach, neshama. We have different words for these things. When we talk about the physical energy of the body, like the body itself has like a certain energy that's animated. That, the difference between a live body and an unlive body is that there's a certain animation to the body. Even if the body is quiet, it's pulsating with life. So that's like the nefesh. That's like the lowest level of energy. We'll call it the nefesh kiyum, and nefesh chiyuni, like a very low level of nefesh, which exists within the body. And as let's just say this like a little bit differently. Like if the body is the definition of the body is connected to time and space, and time and space is very absolute in the world of body, and which means that everything has a very specific time and a very specific space. The level of nefesh, which is like the soul animation of the body, the more soul, the less time and space. So when you say that a person has the power to move, to walk, the fact that something can walk, or let's say, for example, the difference between a stone or a plant, that even though they both have a liveliness to them, and a stone is also animated and it's full of life. If you really look deeply with a microscope on a stone, you'll see that it's teeming with life. But on an observable level, it seems like it's a doimim. It seems like it's inanimate. But then you see a vegetation, which is that it's moving. So it's moving out of its space. So that's the definition of something that's koyach hatzemech, nefesh hatzemech, which means that it's already a more expansion. And then you have like an animal or something that's more alive, a more sentient being that's actually moving about, not only in its same locations, expanding. So we'll say that has a higher level of nefesh. So, and the same thing also within the body. There's a part of the body that just allows the body to expand. So that's one level of nefesh, where the body is just expanding. There's a part of the body which allows us to move. There's a part of the body that allows us to dialogue, which means to enter into your space. So in Hebrew, this is called like the nefesh will be connected to one level, the ruach will be connected to another level, the neshama will be connected to speech, which is the more I'm actually exiting my very defined space and I'm expanding my vessel to receive, and I'm expanding myself, that I'm going beyond the time and space, that's the more consciousness, the more level of soul we have. So the deeper experiences that we have, when we have these deeper experiences, we feel less time and space. So for example, even a very simple example, let's say you're sitting and speaking to someone and you're really enjoying the person's company. So 5 minutes or 5 hours can feel like 5 minutes. But if you're sitting with a nudnik or someone that's really bothering you, and you're sitting for 5 minutes can feel like 5 hours, because time expands and contracts according to the level of connection that you're having. And the same thing also with space, like literally with weight. If you're holding your child that weighs 20 pounds versus you're holding a bundle of rocks that weighs 20 pounds, it's going to feel different. The 20 pounds of rocks is going to feel like 50 pounds. Your child's going to feel like 10 pounds. Because the more connection you have, which means the more you're going out of your ego, out of yourself, the more you exit the world of time and space, the more you enter into the infinite aspect of creation, of the underbelly of creation, which is infinity. So these are all different levels of consciousness that we're constantly trying to evolve. Now, usually we'll say that, the higher levels of experiencing that, you talk about meditation, or you talk about prayer or davening, which is like a form of meditation where you really get to the point of the peak of Shemona Esrei, which is Hashem Sefasai Tiftach Ufi Yagatil L'Sech. When a person says that, what according to the Maggid and according to the great teachers, what a person is saying is, now, God, you speak through me, because now I'm just completely submerged in something that's larger than me. And that has to be experienced, not just spoken about. So the more we have these deeper experiences, like an exaggeration that is correct, like exaggeration state would be like a near-death experience. Or like you said, also sometimes trauma. Sometimes you're very stuck in your ego and you have a very traumatic experience and it breaks down the ego, and all of a sudden you open up, and or it could be something very joyful that you're feeling tremendous amount of joy. And there's a Hasidic analogy that's brought down by the Rebbe Rashab, like if you're dancing at your daughter's wedding and someone steps on your foot, you're not going to feel that pain as much as you're sitting on the train and someone steps on your foot, because the more you're connected, the more yichud you have, the more connectivity you have to something that's beyond you, the less you feel time and space. So these are all different levels. There's multiple levels we can talk about, but they're different grades of consciousness, which at the ultimate peak is the level of Yechida, the highest level of soul, which is paradoxically something that you would think it's the collapse of self in something larger. But the truth is that it's actually Yechida Liyachda, which means my uniqueness within the uniqueness of the Creator, which is the idea is that the ultimate objective of life is not the disappearance of self. The ultimate objective of life is not the disappearance of ego, but it's the transparency of ego. The ultimate objective is not to become nothing, but it's to become something and nothing simultaneously. To truly be my full self as a complete expression of my yichudius, of my individuality, with the recognition that this individuality is an expression of the ultimate individuality, the ultimate I of the Creator, expressed within every single I of creation.
A lot of children just do it originally, just to get a taste, like you smoke a cigarette behind your father's back, you smoke it. But this is stuff that doesn't let you alone. Once you start with it, it's the boss. And basically, it's a problem that is constantly a problem, will be a bigger problem, but for that, we need an organization like this to take it head on, to be able to tell the people, yes, we know that you failed, you know this and that, but there's no such thing as a failure. The only thing you have to do is learn, when you hit bottom, learn how to get back up on top. That's what this organization is about.
So Mark, as a spiritual junkie, I'm going to ask you, how would you get to that? What would be the easiest way to get to that state without using external substances, in your opinion?
Well, I'm trying it myself. And I left my firm about a year ago and didn't have a plan for what I was going to do next. And I ended up going on 2 silent meditation retreats earlier this year, right before the pandemic hit. One was 6 days, one was 5 days. And that really kicked off a meditation spree where I'm now meditating 5 hours a day. Since February. I was up to 10 hours at some point, and I'm basically doing what Rav Pinson was saying without saying the actual Jewish prayers, but the intention of the meditation is this desire to basically surrender, to be embodying the broader stream of consciousness, intelligence within the vessel, and to be this nothingness but uniqueness at the same time. That's the best way I can describe it with words, because this is all happening in the silence. So for me, it's taken just a lot of practice because I'm a very mental person, and I wasn't interested in any of this stuff before. I couldn't meditate for 15 minutes a year ago. But I found through this process, there is a palpable energy that comes into the body, which is now increasing and entering different parts of the body that have come about through this process of silence and surrender. So from my own personal experience, I would say that meditation and having this general life intention, whether it's in meditation or otherwise, along the lines of what Rav Pinson said, is a way to get there.
Let me ask you this, because I'm not supposed to be the one coming with the answers, but would you say when you're using external substances, your first high is probably your highest high, and within, at least, okay, I found within spirituality, you can keep going. It's like unlimited. The way you're describing is you're trying to reach nothingness, but there's an unlimited level of that that you can keep going, and every time you're getting to a higher high. Would you see that to be the case?
Well, my sense is that it's the process is infinite. There is no final end point, but there is a constant striving to optimize our utility as a vessel. That's the way I put it from my own experience, that I want to be the best vessel I can be. And then that in turn leads to different experiences. I mean, sometimes the experience is less transparent and less obvious, and other times I feel it more. But in the course of researching other people that have been through this journey, I think there can be a tendency to want to latch onto the experience itself, to say that I felt so much bliss or whatever, and now I've arrived. And then that can lead to an attachment to a state, which is almost counter to the process itself. So really for me, as I said before, it's about the intention of why you're doing it. And then the states will be what they're going to be, because really the individual is not in control of the ultimate state or high that's experienced.
I just want to go back a little bit, and I know this is a little technical. I was asked to be on this panel yesterday. Then they gave me your name, and I looked you up on YouTube, and I saw you talking about something, and you said something very interesting, to me at least. It was, and I don't remember what you were referring to, but you spoke about the brain as being a filter, which I understand that to be the case too, that at least the conscious brain that we're calling conscious brain. And then when you shut that down, or whether it's through hallucinogenics or through meditation, you're basically you're slowing the brain function, and then you're able to see more things or experience more. But you mentioned something that there is something within the brain or within the head. What were you referring to? Something spiritual or something? Did you call it the soul? I don't know what you called it, but you said the location was in the head.
Well, some scientists speak about the pineal gland, known in some traditions as the third eye. And I know in the Jewish tradition, there is the tefillin goes on that spot as well. So some people say that is an area that kind of connects the body to the spirit, and some say that the chemical DMT, which can be taken externally as well, ingested, but it's also released naturally by the body, which connects to these other realms of consciousness. So I would say from my own experience, one of the first things I felt at the first silent meditation retreat, 3 days in, I started to feel pounding right here. And I didn't make anything of it at first, other than why am I feeling pounding in that spot? And we were it was kind of a non-denominational Buddhist retreat center that we were at. And there were statues of people with a dot there. And I said, oh, wow, that's the third eye pineal gland that everyone was talking about. So I haven't been able to correlate that with experiences yet, other dimensional experiences beyond the fact that it starts pounding at certain times.
Rav Pinson, I was always led to believe in the neshama, the soul is in the heart, but I think in the Tanya it says something about either the neshama or the chelek elka is in the brain. Do you know what?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate there?
So basically, in the Tanya, basically, because it's talking about the difference between the animal soul and the divine soul. So once they give an analogy of where is it within the body is the part that's most connected to the vitality of the body, which is like what the heart distributes the blood. So that's like very visceral, very, very mundane. That's like what, like it's the life force that's pumping through us. So that's connected to the nefesh Bahamas. That would be connected to like your animal soul. Again, that's not a negative thing. It's the ego that's survival, that's healthy to survive. And then there's the capacity of the brain, where the brain allows the possibility on some level. This is not the highest level of soul, but the brain is sort of the ultimate medium that we have experientially that allows us to enter into another person's space. We can think I can think how you're feeling. I can think how you're thinking. So that idea of me entering into your space is already a movement outside of myself, outside of my ego. So that by definition reads already an expansion. I'm moving to a higher dimension where it's not just about circulating my blood for my survival, but I'm able to identify with your problem. So if you're going through a hard time, I can think it through with you. So that ability to enter into another space is really just another way of saying that there's a higher potential within the person. So the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya is trying to explain that where would that be within the body? Where do we find within the body a capacity to be outside the body? That's in the brain. So which part of the brain exactly, again, the pineal gland and DMT, all this type of information. So there were a lot of philosophers like Descartes and people that actually believe this. In the Hasidic text, there's definitely mention of different parts of the brain. And there are different parts of the brain, and one is connected to Chachma, the right part of the brain, left part of the brain is connected to Bina, the frontal lobe is connected to Das, which is the connectivity to part of it, and then the Kesser is like the crown of the head. So there's definitely, we don't really know the brain. We have a very little amount of knowledge of what actually the capacity of the physical brain is. That's one of the untouched places of research. It could be eventually we'll actually find that, and I do believe it's true, that there has to be some place within the body where there's everything has what we'll call like a mamutza. Everything has like an in-between state where it's not that, it's not the other, but it connects things. So everything in life is like that. So there has to be a space within the physical self that allows us to have access to something that's outside the self. So what part of the body would that be? That would probably be in the brain. That's what the Alter Rebbe was saying, that the part of the brain that becomes, so it's not just only a metaphor, but it could be that's the interactive, the in-between space that allows for something higher to come through.
That he's referring to chelek elokam mimal is in the brain. Is that what he said?
Yeah, the neshama. Yeah, chelek elokam mimal. But I just want to say like this. Like we talk about neshama. It's a big word. Soul. It's a very big word, and there's many different levels of soul, and we mostly identify when we talk about soul, or like we talk about experiences. We identify things with their experiences or the feeling, but the truth is that the soul is the backdrop. It's the experiencer. It's the feeler. It's not the feeling and it's not the experience. But our minds cannot grasp the experience itself because the mind is the experience. The brain is the experiencer, or the higher level of consciousness experiencer. But it can't grasp itself because then itself is an experience. So the only way we can actually like really get in touch with our soul is actually to feel ourselves as watching ourselves. So that's why in the Zohar it says that, in Tikkun Zohar it says that the word das, which is like the frontal part of the brain, which is connected probably to the pineal gland or the third eye, that das is actually, in reverse is aid, which is witness. So it's like the witness self, the part of self that observes self. And that's the self that's beyond the self. And so there's multiple layers, because as you're going deeper into yourself, you say, okay, that's the part that's watching myself. And then you have another voice and say, and that's the part of me that's saying to myself that's watching myself. So there's layers and infinite layers of that, we'll call that conscious self.
Right. There are certainly multi-layers, and that I know from firsthand experience. And again, I'm not anywhere close to any of your levels. But it's very interesting that a lot of these things were taught to us and they went right over my head. Like, for instance, one of my favorite books is The Power of Now. If you have to put it down into 2 lines, it's probably that he's worried about the conscious brain becoming, instead of becoming a tool, taking over, and then focusing, instead of being present, worrying about the future or worrying about the past, and that's where all anxiety comes from. But we have a saying from the Ebenezer, which was 1,000 years ago, and it's made into a song, Avar ayin, v'asida dayin, v'hod v'karafayin daigid minayin. So we have these teachings in Judaism, but it's just, we don't necessarily experience it. And then when people like Mark come along, or other New Age teachers, I guess, they allow us to experience and understand what it was that the great masters were teaching that we, just went over my head. Maybe you were able to pick it up over the years through the text, but most people miss it within our community, I think.
No, I mean, Levi, the very simple answer to the reason for that is very simple, because it's massly, it's taught to the mass. So when you teach very deep spiritual teachings to the mass, you put in you dumb it down to the most simple form, and you give people just the words. And then the people, you're supposed to ask the question, like, what am I actually learning? What does it actually mean? And then you have to like internalize that. So, okay, so you get the information, and school is, and unfortunately all schools are like this. School is a very good place where people learn information, but they're not teaching people how to live. And what that's part of the maturity. When you take the information that you learn, we say, okay, so what did that information mean? These are teachings that are actually represent experiential experiences, not just information, because information is just information, who cares? And then you have to say, okay, so what does that really mean to me?
So part of why I was bringing all this up is because I think it's important for everybody to realize there's so much more to tap into, even in ourselves, not even in ourselves, just in ourselves. We could spend a whole lifetime tapping in, and and it could be so enjoyable, and we don't have to chase anything else. Mark, where would you say the gut instinct comes from?
Well, to me, everything is derived from this unitary source, the one mind, the one stream of consciousness. So all novelty, all knowledge, all creativity, intuition, it's seemingly coming from that one place, and we are the vessel and receiving it in however manner we do that, whether it's through the brain, other parts of the body. I don't think science understands properly how that works.
So creativity, gut instinct, and everything else, you're saying we're just tapping into this larger consciousness that's not within ourselves necessarily, we're just a part of.
Right. It's more like memories, knowledge. Those are things that we tap into using different aspects of our anatomy, and likely the brain is very involved in a lot of that. But it's not housed in the brain, but rather the brain and the body are mechanisms for tapping into this stream of consciousness.
And if somebody wanted to tap into one thing versus another, let's say to their gut instinct or to creativity or to anything else, do you have techniques that you would recommend?
Yeah, well, there are lots of people who have many techniques for how to do things like this. There are some in the psychic realm, certain types of meditation to be able to tap into different whirlpools in the stream, or things that are far away in space and time. I think meditation generally is a way to do that, but the type of meditation might lead to different aspects of it. I think there's also a trial and error aspect where something might seem like an intuition, and then you might act on it and realize, wait a second, that was just my ego or some part of my overthinking that actually clouded out the real insight. So it's something that I still work on, where I feel like I have an intuition towards something, but maybe it didn't turn out to be right. But now that I think about it, the number one signal for me that I'm on the right track, at least in my own life, is passion. When I feel like I need to go towards anything and like there's no question about it, I've learned that is me tapping in somehow, because usually when I'm following that passion and not in an unbridled manner and not hesitating, it works out well.
I'll just say, Levi, like this. First of all, I would say what you said about the high. So the Alter Rebbe once said that if the sinners of the world will know what kind of pleasure they can experience when they have dveikus with Hashem, they have unity with Hashem, they will leave all their past.
Drop everything else.
Yes, they become great tzaddikim. because that's the pleasure. That's the physical pleasure that a person has. It's a sensation of pleasure throughout the body. Now, regarding to gut feelings and creativity, I think it's a larger conversation, but I just want to say very short that not every gut feeling is correct. Now, I do feel like creativity does come from a very, it's quite a muscle. There's a very potential that we can be creative. It's very distinct. Every person has a creative ability. We are part of the creator that gives us the creativity ability. But when it comes to like a voice that tells us something, how do we know if the voice is real or not? So first of all, you have to really know yourself, and that's a process. So like trial and error, really to understand who you are. But there's also a very simple parameter how to know when a voice is true. So there's a famous story in the Talmud in Gemara that talks about a character called Acher. He became a great sinner. And the Rameir, who was a student, says, Shuvah, like you should do tshuva. Acher, you should do tshuva. So he says, Shamati mechuri apargo, I heard from behind the curtain, he was a great mystic. He says that I heard, Shuvah bonam shuvim chutz ma'acher. I heard a voice that says, everybody can return besides Acher. So I had a very deep intuition, deep gut feeling, and I heard this voice that came out, this heavenly voice that said that everyone can do better, everyone can return, everyone can change their life besides me. So therefore, there's no use. So he hears a baskol, he hears a divine voice that says this. So the Baal Shem Tov says that this is a baskol of klipa. It's a negative voice, because any voice that tells you you can't is negative. Any voice that says you can, it will work out, it's going to be good, is a positive voice. Any voice that says it's not going to work out, doubts yourself, and puts it's impossible, and says you're never gonna amount to anything. You're never gonna reach any level. All those negative voices that put you down and doesn't allow you to grow and to be something and to be your maximum most. All those voices are negative. So I would say, like, how do you know if a good voice is correct? If a good gut voice is correct, you have to see, is this voice actually allowing me to become more, to be a better person, a better Jew, to be more connected to Hashem? Is this voice allowing me to further things? Or is it putting me down? If it's putting you down, it's the voice of Klipa. Don't listen to it. Shut it down and move on.
So on the subject of reaching higher consciousness, you have people that are, you'd call asleep. They're just focused on the details in front of them and reacting to that. And then sometimes something happens in life and that opens your mind to that there is more out there, and then you become curious and you start searching and start actually experiencing, and then you realize that is the greatest pleasure. Mark, would you say that one can wake somebody else up, or does that have to happen on their own? Just the beginning of that journey. Does that have to happen? Does something have to happen to that person on their own, or can another person wake up somebody that's what I'm calling asleep?
Yeah, well, I've thought a lot about this question because it's informed my own personal journey. Roughly 4 years ago, I didn't know much about any of this, became very passionate. And since then, I've ended up writing 2 books and doing a podcast series and doing lots of talks on this topic. So when I first learned about this stuff, it was just, I was curious to learn because my worldview shifted. I used to think consciousness comes from the brain. That's how conventional science teaches us. There's no real meaning to life. The universe is random. When you die, it's over. That's it. And then I learned maybe that's all wrong, Mark, that there's a lot more, we're interconnected, that consciousness is beyond the body. And I wanted to tell as many people as I could because this had a major impact on my life and how I prioritize things and the way I just looked at life. So for me, it ended up the way of disseminating information is to write books and give talks and do podcasts. And what I've learned is that people have to be ready on their own. Forcing people does not work very well. So what I've tried to do is make the information accessible and provide resources for people so that if they are interested, they can pursue it. And there's a fine line between doing that and being pushy and trying to force a belief system. So I really try hard to present the information for those interested. And usually when I have one-on-one conversations or even in a room, I can tell who is receptive and who is not. And when there's a lack of receptivity or a wall there, it's usually best to kind of back off. But when people are receptive, at that point, one can, I think, initiate or potentially expedite someone's awakening by providing certain information. Like certain things I'll notice, a light bulb goes off in a person's head. And then it's really their journey, but it's like we're all guiding each other towards this evolution and we play different roles.
Yeah, I do think generally a person has to be ready, and it's just the openness. I don't even know if a person needs to know what they have to be open to. They just have to be open to the possibility that there's something different. Because when we're stuck in our own narrative of what the worldview is, and we're holding on it very dearly, and we're protecting it, no matter what happens in the world, nothing's going to change. No matter you see Kriyas Yamsuf, you see the sea split. There's a famous medrash that says that Rosh Shifcha that even the maidservant of Israel saw more than the great prophet of Ezekiel by the splitting of the sea. So the obvious question is, why call her a maidservant? She's the greatest prophet. She's greater than the Cheskel. The answer is because she's still remaining the maidservant. She wasn't affected. She saw, but she didn't know what she was seeing. She wasn't open to see it. So if you prepare yourself and you're open to the experience, then you can become something and you can actually experience something. But if you don't, the sea can split in front of you and you just don't notice it. So I think, yeah, there's a need to, there has to be some type of opening, some type of, even a small opening, even a desire just of the possibility of something.
So on that note, the term mitzvah, which refers to the commandments, the 613 commandments, the Kabbalah explains that mitzvah is milashon tzafsa v'chibur. Mitzvah is in the root word of connection, and we're connecting to God. And it does explain that we're connecting to God on a higher level than the way He permeates in this world, and therefore we really can't. Most people cannot feel it unless they're really a righteous person that have no blockage, no sin blockage, so to speak. So most people doing the mitzvahs do not actually feel the connection. My question is, who are you actually helping by doing the mitzvah?
You mean if you're doing it without intention? That's what you're asking?
Even with intention, it's by definition either forced or robotic. Because if you're not feeling the connection, what are you actually accomplishing by doing the mitzvah?
So there's an idea also. Okay, I'm not talking about the halachic parameters of you have to do a mitzvah, whether it's halachically required for you to do it and you have to do it no matter what. I'm just talking about, like, you're asking about the opening, like a feeling of the connection. So this idea that achar hamaisim l'shachma levavos, that sometimes actions, that's actually a path to openness. So sometimes a person's working from a top-down idea. So I'm going to open up my consciousness. I'm going to open up myself. I'm trying to daven correctly or pray, whatever the practice is, but it's like more an internal practice. So I'm going to be open, therefore I'm going to start feeling it. That's one path. But the other path sometimes is, let me just do these actions, at least with the intention that they should do something. And the actions themselves, by the recognition that these are an action that is connecting me to the divine, that eventually opens up the heart, that your consciousness opens through the actions themselves, by doing the actions. So it follows. Your mind follows your actions. So instead of the actions following your mind follows your actions. So I believe that even if a person is doing something by rut, but they're doing it over and over again with a serious commitment to that, sort of that creates the space for the opening to occur. Besides the fact of the halachic requirement that you have to do the mitzvah because you're commanded, but that's a separate issue. But the idea of the mitzvah as a chibur, to feel that connection, a lot of times, I would just say in general, like just the fact of doing things in an absolute way, you're just doing it because you have to do it. And even if you feel like you say that, you feel forced, that in itself already creates the possibility that there's something higher than you that's commanding. So when you live your life, you say, okay, I'm a very selfish person. I like to do things the way I want to do them. I want to do them always because this is the way I feel. I don't feel, I'm feeling it, I'm not feeling it. And then you say, but you know what, for these 10 minutes a day, I'm going to do something despite the fact how I feel or I don't feel. That in itself is saying that I recognize that there's something more than my ego. There's a recognition that there's something higher. And the more I believe in the absoluteness of that idea, the more I actually connect to that absolute. So sometimes the Kabbalah soil, the rut of just doing it, by accepting it, that actually shows to me and allows me to open myself up to something that is actually larger than me. So it's specifically what I don't understand in a way that actually really opens me up. And I'm not stuck in my ego.
I see that the hour is up, as you say, when you're having fun and you don't realize what time it is. Could either of you or both of you, maybe to end this, give us some technique, but to give us an actual experience maybe even for somebody that's just ready to open up, something that you can share right now that someone can do at home when they're watching? Huh?
I'll let Mark do that.
You let Mark do that?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's really began with curiosity and asking questions and not assuming that I know everything. And Rav Pinson was alluding to this idea of openness. I think that comes and stems from humility, the understanding that in a human body with a human brain, there's only so much that we can understand. And we can only understand things in a certain way, like, the concept of infinity. We acknowledge that it exists, but our brain can't comprehend or grasp what that is. So when we start to break down how much we don't know in life, then we realize that what we think we know might be leading us astray. So to have that openness, that mentality, that doesn't mean to believe everything we hear, but the humility, I think, opens doors, and it opens doors spiritually, but also in every aspect of life.
That's Kabbalah.
That's great.
That's old style Kabbalah salt. That's what he's saying. Just accept. Do it.
Just be open to more.
Exactly.
You don't have it all figured out. Yeah, that was great. I think that's a great note to end on. And thank you both very much. Thank you, Amudim, and thank you all for tuning in. Have a great night.
Bye.